I'm going to read most of my message this morning only so that I don't go completely off script and start something that might be here longer than Ken usually keeps you. So I'm going to try not to do that. When Ken said he needed someone to preach for him the end of February, the words, "I'll do it," came from somewhere. I don't know where. After I thought about it, I thought, what was I thinking? I just don't know what I was saying. But I do want to share some things with you this morning, and I hope that you feel the faith in God that I feel. When I was here Tuesday night, when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about, here Tuesday night at the pancake dinner, somebody said to me, who knew I was speaking, I tried to keep it as quiet as possible, but who knew I was speaking said, "Why don't you tell us a little bit about Sylvia?" And I kind of looked at them with like a question, and I thought, well, I've been here 3 years, and I'm not quite sure, but I guess. And they looked at me and they started to laugh, and they said, "Well, we know a lot about Ken, but we don't have a clue who Sylvia is." So I thought, all right, well, maybe I'll share a little bit of what I've done and who I am before I start my service this morning. And let's see, where do I start? I was born in Bristol, Virginia, same place Bob was. And I've met a few people here in South Carolina that were born there also. I thought it was just a small little town, but I always wanted to be born on the Tennessee side. One side of the street was Virginia, one side was Tennessee. I always wanted to be on the Tennessee side because it made me more southern. But the hospital was on the Virginia side, so I had no choice. My mom said, you had no choice. But anyway, I was a stay-at-home mom until Ken decided to go in the ministry, and I had to figure out how we made a living with him doing that. So I went to work. I worked for 32 years in 3 different companies where we manufactured parts for commercial aircraft and for the military. Wasn't the typical pastor's wife, I can say that. My jobs there consisted of being program manager, purchasing manager, manufacturing manager. I kind of learned it all. And my last job at Davis Aircraft, which I held for 17 years, was as vice president of sales and marketing. And the last 4 years I was there, I was if you want to call, general manager in the absence of the owner of the company. The most memorable part of my job was working with Major General Les Eisner of the South Carolina McEntire Joint National Guard base. I met him, probably in about 2000, 2001, when Davis Aircraft was working with the Guard to manufacture a blade fold for the Apache helicopter. I've never piloted a helicopter, but I have crashed many in a Boeing simulator. I've driven a Humvee over the training facility in South Bend when we were making parts for AM General. I loved it. I was scared to death, but I had to do it because I was the only woman around, and if I didn't, I would have never heard the end of that. So I did, and it was awesome. It was awesome. I am humbled by the men and women in the military who have served this country and who continue to serve this country. I'm not the person who can go up and say to them, I want to thank you for your service, because before I can get that out of my mouth, I'm crying. That's how bad it is, and how emotional I get for the people who protect us all our lives and give us our freedom. Ken was always a part of the team at Davis Aircraft. We just have always been a team together. He went to many of the Army-Navy conferences that I went to, and he was the unofficial chaplain at Davis Aircraft. He took care of the people who didn't have people to take care of them. And I was a certified lay speaker in New York for many, many years. I covered for pastors when they were away, which was probably much easier than standing here in front of you now after I haven't done this for a very long time. I was a UMW president for as many years I can't count. I can go into 12, but probably many, many more. And I was a person who went to church all the time because I wanted to go to church, not because Ken was the pastor. Right now, I'm a stay-at-home grandma, and I love it. And now, as you know, I spend most of my time doing things at home and taking care of hubby. And I wanted to tell you all of that, but the most important thing that I'm going to tell you about myself is that I am humbled to be a child of God with a deep and unending faith. I try my best to live that song that Ken talked about last week, of being humble and kind, and not to judge people because you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what's happening in another person's life, and you can't judge people by what you see. Okay, so now I've told you a little bit about myself, and we'll get into the rest of this. It's difficult for me to put a lot together on what I'm going to speak about. It was difficult because most of you know about Ken's shooting, about him being shot, about his cancer, but I want to give you another side to that story, and that's going to be my side and how I dealt with it. You all know the story of the shooting, stealing the car, kidnapping Ken, shooting him in the face and leaving him in an abandoned building site for dead. But while he was there, I was at a doctor's office where he left me when he parked the car. And when he parked the car and I got out, I was pretty angry with him at the time. He wouldn't let me leave. I was on crutches, and he would not let me leave my pocketbook in the car. And he kept telling me, you can't leave it here. And I said, there's nobody going to bother anything. Why can't I just put it under the seat? No, you can't leave it here. So I'm on crutches with a pocketbook trying to get up the steps. So when I left him, I slammed the door. Don't ever leave your person you love slamming the door, because God forbid anything had happened to Ken, it would have been the last thing I remembered. Always kiss your loved ones goodbye. When you go to sleep and when you leave them, take it from someone that's been there. I was there for over an hour, and Ken didn't return. No call. I didn't hear a thing from him. I was sure he was around the corner at Methodist Hospital talking to his buddies, and boy, was I mad, because here I am standing on crutches, walking up and down the block, and he's not coming around. When the hour was over, I called our daughter to see if she'd heard from him, because it was just totally unlike him. And she said, no, Mom, I haven't heard a word. But in about 10 minutes, we got a call at the doctor's office. There weren't cell phones back then, so got a call at the doctor's office from my daughter, and she said, Mom, there's been a little bit of a problem. And I said, what do you mean a little bit of a problem? She said, well, someone stole the car. So I said, is Dad okay? She said, well, Dad's in the hospital. So I said, all right, I'll walk around to Methodist Hospital, and I'll see what's going on, no problem. And she said, no, Mom, he's in Brookdale Hospital, which was about 25 minutes away from where we are, but he's got minor injuries, Mom, minor injuries. Just come to the hospital. The nurse in the office, when we got off the phone, said, we'll call the hospital, and I'll talk to the doctor, and we'll see what's really going on, and I'll take you there. It was the end of the day. When she called, she gave me the phone, and a police officer told me that Ken was shot. And I said, shot? Where was he shot? Well, he was shot in the face. And I think you better get here as soon as you can, because he's in grave condition. As you can imagine, I was pretty hysterical at that moment. I can't tell you that I kept it together. And this little Oriental doctor that I had, all of about 5 foot tall, came up and shook me. And he shook me. And he said to me, you calm down. And you can't let him see you like this. And you can't let your kids see you like this. So you pull yourself together now. And I did, because he scared the heck out of me. Anyway, I went to the hospital, and the rest most of you know. Ken was pretty bad, and they didn't give me a heck of a lot of encouragement that he'd make it through the night, but they made me go home because they had so many tests to do, and I had my children there. They weren't little kids. I mean, the youngest was 16 at the time, and Susan was going to PA school, but they needed me to be brave. And during that night, when everybody went to bed, about 2 o'clock, I woke up, really didn't go to sleep. I'll just rephrase that. And I just started crying, unconditionally crying, and I couldn't stop. I felt like I had been so abandoned. And for the first time that I could remember, I felt the real presence of God beside me. I prayed, and I prayed. And the peace that I felt, I cannot explain to you. Without that faith in God, I don't know how I would have dealt with all that happened over the next year. 30 days in the hospital, 2 trials, but I made it through. Now, I'm not saying that I didn't always feel God's presence or that I didn't pray, but in times like this, it's just different. It's just different. We had our problems, as everybody does in their lives, sick kids, money, disagreements, that you pray for strength and you get through, but what was to come, I never saw coming. Most of you know about Ken's story of his cancer diagnosis in 2000. The doctor gave us very little hope for Ken surviving and told us up front that if he was going to survive, it would not be with their help alone. There was a new iodine treatment being used, and they were going to try it on Ken. They had only given it as an experiment to patients once a year, but they had to be aggressive with Ken, and he would get 2 treatments within 6 months. Not to take away from the rest of it, because I'm not going to talk about his cancer anymore, but to tell you that it was 7 years before they told us, as we walked out the door of Dr. Larson's office, that Ken was not a very sick man. And every time we left, and in the 8th year, he said, I think we might have it licked. It was a long journey, but as you see from Ken, he made it through, and we made it through stronger people that now we are. Anyway, he was to have his second treatment on December 10th, 2000. On December 8th, I received a call from our son, Scott, who had been here in South Carolina with my mom and dad for the past 10 years or so. My mom, who had been sick with COPD, had taken a turn for the worse, and the doctors wanted to remove her from life support. They needed me here to be with my dad. I left as soon as I took Ken to the hospital for his treatment. He had to be there for a few days because he had to be in isolation because of the radioactive iodine, and no one could go see him. I came here to Lexington Hospital, and we removed her life support on December 10th. Of course, my mom died, and we buried her. Then I went home and picked Ken up from the hospital. In February 2001, my dad developed pneumonia and was put in the hospital. He was diagnosed with lung cancer, and in June, as I put it, he opted out of life. I think he just couldn't live without my mom. I never ask what can happen next, because believe me, there's always a next. My brother, who lived here for most of his adult life, had moved with his family to Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains. Joe was my only sibling, and we were very, very close. In October of that year, one night around midnight, the phone at the parsonage rang, and Ken picked it up. There was someone on the other end of the line, but we couldn't understand anything they were saying. So Ken finally hung up after a couple of minutes. The next morning, we received a call that my brother had died in a car accident that night. The night before that, and the call was from him. I'm not telling you this so you can be sad. I want you to hear the good part. Okay? We got on a plane. This time, Ken was with me. And we traveled to Bristol for my brother's funeral, and I made the arrangements because his children just were completely out of it. We received visitors at the funeral home the night before the burial, and when I went back to the room, Scott put his arms around me, and I said, I can't do this again. I can't bury another one of my family, the only one I had left. I finally went to bed and went to sleep. All of a sudden, it seemed like I heard angels in my head. And this is a true story. As if they were in the room and they were singing this song. On the wings of a snow-white dove, he'll send his pure, sweet love, a sign from above on the wings of a dove. When troubles surround us, when evil comes, the body grows weak and the spirit grows numb. When these things beset us, God does not forget us. He sends down his love on the wings of a dove. When I woke up that morning, again feeling the peace and the presence of someone else leading me, we stopped for breakfast on our way to the funeral home, and as I looked out the window, snowflakes started to fall. And on the branch outside this building was a dove. Now, I didn't tell no one, about this, because they would probably think I had lost my mind. Christmas was approaching, and it had been a rough year. I was sitting and trying to decide whether we were going to have an open house at the parsonage for the church, if I could handle it, when a package from our son arrived. And I don't know how many people can see this, because I couldn't from the back, but my eyes are getting pretty bad as my age gets older. But this is a Santa. And you might say, well, crazy person has this Santa up here during Lent. But this is a Santa that I received from my son, Scott, holding a white dove. Holding a white dove. And in his hand, as you see, is the white dove. I still did not tell anyone my story, but I got through Christmas. This story is not to make you feel sorry, but to tell you that God is there when you need him most. When there's nothing else, when your friends are not there, your best friend is there for you always. I'm going to tell you one more story. It's short, and it's not easy to get through, but I'm going to tell it. And I might not get through it too easily, so just pray for me while I sit here. I shared with some of the people in the second service a couple of weeks ago, because we need prayers for our family at this time, that our granddaughters, our daughters' children who were here at Christmas time, were both molested last summer. And I asked for prayers for the family during that time. Because the man is down to his last chance to take a plea. And there will be a trial, and the girls will have to testify if there is no plea. This happened in May. And Ken went to our yearly Methodist conference in early June. And I was sitting on the back porch of our son's house, which is beautiful. It looks over the lake. In the summer, it's gorgeous. In the spring, it's gorgeous all the time. And I looked down at the dock. And if you look at the picture on the screen, there's a white dove on the dock. I had not seen a white dove since I had went through all of the stuff in 2001. And there, sitting on the dock, I had my iPad with me. No one would have believed me if I hadn't. And I had said I saw a dove, because no one has ever seen one there, and we haven't seen it again. And I took this picture, and I took a video of it flying around for a very few moments that it was there. So what I'm telling you, that God is there for you if you open your eyes. And in the times when you forget, he's there. Faithfulness, steadfastness, allegiance, to be faithful to God at all times. Faith is believing without seeing, being faithful to trust in God even when circumstances are not encourageable. But how do we learn to have faith in or be faithful without question to someone we can't see or we can't touch with our hands? We are taught faith and faithfulness by our family, by our friends, and by our church family. I had a great family as a child, not without problems, believe me, as every family has. We were poor, and my parents were young. But I remember those early years, and I remember how much I was loved. But the one thing I remember most about my childhood, my earliest remembrances of my childhood, was that my dad took me to church every Sunday. If I misbehaved, I got a little pinch, and I learned how to behave in church. But I always told Ken when we lived in New York that in the South, you don't ask a person, did you go to church? You might ask them, what church? But most people do go to church, and faith is there and strong. It's not the same as it is in some of the bigger cities where people don't go. But church makes a difference in your life, and the children learn from us. Us older folks in the church are here to tell our stories and we have so many of them to tell. My story is not alone. I'm sure that so many of you, especially if you're as old as I am, have many stories like I do to tell. We need to let our faith tell people how faith has touched our lives through the troubles we have faced. You parents of teenagers, keep your kids in the church. Make them get up on Sunday mornings and sit next to you in a pew. And if they stray for a while, hopefully they will return because of what they have learned from you. And you young parents, what a joy to see the young children in this church, because you have the most important job of all. If you think these children are too young, think again. Bring those little ones to church and let them grow in their faith. We have an awesome children's ministry here. Isn't it wonderful when in our children's moment, our children are not only learning, but sometimes have answers before we even ask them. Our granddaughters are handling this trauma much better because they have always been in church. They pray every night, and the first person they wanted to talk to about the problem after the police and their parents was their pastor, and that was their choice and their request. Give our children the tools they need to face this life. God never said there would not be trials, there would not be sorrow, there would not be loss, but he did promise for all who believe that he will give you peace. Believe yourself, have faith, and turn to your best friend in times of need. He will always be there. Carry his peace with you and don't leave him on a shelf. Let us pray. Jesus said when he appeared to disciples and then to Thomas, "Peace be with you. Lord, let your presence be our peace." Lord, hear our prayer this morning. Be our friend. We need you beside us. Sometimes the uncertainty of today and tomorrow are too much to bear, too much for us to face alone. Be here for us. Help us learn to accept your presence and know that you can lift and bear all our burdens. We pray this in your name. Amen.